Hey everybody, I'm Wandering Pastor coming to you on this beautiful fall day here in Michigan with some thoughts on the upcoming election. People have asked me okay, Pastor Dave, how should I vote? What do we do in cases like this? How do we know what the best thing is to do? And so I just want to give you some thoughts over the next few videos about how to process it in your own mind. Because a couple things. First of all, we don't have any perfect candidates. And I realize that no matter who you are, whichever side you are on, I mean, after all, 40% of our populace leans Democrat, and 40% of our populace leans Republican, and pretty much those groups are going to vote the way they're going to vote, period, right? There's very little you can do to convince them otherwise. There's a good 20% in the middle that are unsure each time. And in this case, you've got two less than perfect candidates, far from perfect candidates. And so you're trying to figure out, especially as a Christian, how are we supposed to vote on this stuff? How are we even supposed to process this stuff? Clearly, our country is very divided, and I've seen a lot of rude and disrespectful behavior and words from one side or the other. I have friends on both, or I would call it both extremes and both ends of the thing, and yet I see them doing things that frankly shouldn't be done, especially by a Christian. And we have to try to rise above it. And so one of the things I want to help you to do is to make sure that you're not being resentful or hateful or rude, or you're not giving in. The other thing is I want you to help to think through these things logically and think through these things in a way that will actually help you to make an informed decision, not just a gut decision. I don't know when it was, 40 years ago, that our country started to go down this line of personality politics. So you vote for the person you like instead of how they're going to govern. Or you vote against the person you dislike instead of how you're going to govern. I remember my first election that I could participate in. It was Ronald Reagan against Jimmy Carter. And the media had come out against Ronald Reagan in a very big way. I remember that very well because I was finally paying attention. And one of the things they were saying was Ronald Reagan was a bumbling buffoon who didn't know anything. He was an actor. He had no qualifications. He would just surround himself with people who would tell him what to do. And they also said that he was a warmonger and he would lead us to nuclear war with Russia. And I remember, honestly, on the night of election night, when Ronald Reagan won in a landslide, I remember my mother crying on the couch saying, I believe we're going to go to war. And of course, none of that was true. And Ronald Reagan, I think, did a pretty good job. But it was interesting because even back then, even with the media such as it was back then, there was animosity, but they could work together. I have a book one of my kids gave me called Tip and the Gipper, and it was about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan and how they were on opposite sides, and they were very clearly on opposite sides, but they would come together for the good of the country, and they would govern together, and they wouldn't constantly attack each other. There were differences, of course, but it wasn't a personal attack. Now it is, and I think social media has a lot to do with that. But clearly for believers, we have to be able to rise above that. Now, it also is important to note that this stuff is important even for the Christian. We've talked a lot about, in these videos, we've talked a lot about the fact that you, as a believer in Jesus Christ, are about the kingdom of heaven more than the kingdom of this world, right? You're more about eternity than you are about here and now. And yet, that doesn't mean that here and now is unimportant, nor does it mean that you have no responsibility in the here and now. I mean, we're all wrestling through this stuff. We're trying to do our best, but we got to remember some things. First of all, I believe you and I will give an account for every vote we cast. Jesus said in Matthew 12, let me just read a passage from Matthew 12. A tree is identified from its fruit, begins in verse 33. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. Now, it's easy to see that politicians say some outlandish things. And in particular, when you look at advertisements and so on, political ads, which I know we all are tired of, they say outlandish things. And they will deceive you. They will lead you emotionally. They will lead you to be irrational. And they will take things out of context. Both parties do this. They take things completely out of context. And you can just tell that segment of that sentence was lifted out of context, and now they make it a commercial about what that person is either for or against, and they try to make the other person into a complete enemy. Again, we can't let that happen, and yet we will give an account, I believe, for every vote we cast or every vote we don't cast. Now, some of you, I know, some friends are saying, well, I think both of these candidates are so flawed that I'm just not going to vote. Again, that's a decision you have to make, but remember, you will answer to the Lord for it, because one of the principles we have to understand is America in 2024 is governed very differently than in Jesus' day under Roman occupation, right? We have been given a unique privilege in this nation, and I believe a unique responsibility to take an active role in how we're governed and who governs us, electing certain people and so on. And we have been put here for such a time as this. And that, of course, that phrase goes back to the book of Esther, where Esther is a queen and the Jews are going to be slaughtered. And Esther, as a Jewish queen, the king doesn't know she's Jewish. Her uncle says to her, look, deliverance for the Jews will come, but whether it comes from you or from someone else. But make no mistake, the Lord put you here for such a time as this. In other words, you're in the spot you're in for the very moment you're in it. God didn't make a mistake by putting you here in 2024. I believe we have a responsibility to pray and act accordingly in today's day and age, including how we vote or how we don't vote or whatever the case might be. Again, one of the things Jesus talked about is the good stewards. Good steward in Matthew chapter 25. It's basically, do we invest ourselves in the kingdom of God, serving him while we're here on this earth in every way possible? And if so, then we're being a good steward. If not, if we're just burying our talent, in this case, burying our faith and burying our vote and burying our opinions, then we're not being good stewards. We're not serving the Lord in the way that we should. So, one of the key principles is that there are times where we do as much as we can to be as informed as we can, to be as humble and serving the Lord and godly as we can, but then to make our opinions known and to make our vote count to the best extent we can. Again, realizing we have two completely seriously flawed candidates and political parties that we have to choose from if we're involved in it. One of the things we have to do is we have to rise above personality politics. We have to push back against the political commercials or the social media posts that will very obviously make that person look like they're an enemy. Whoever you've decided to vote for looks great. Whoever you've decided to vote against looks like a terrible enemy or a buffoon or Hitler or an imbecile or whatever. And we should not do that. In particular, as Christians, we should not do that. We should be humble. We should be quiet. We should be prayerful. We should be researching the ways that this person will probably govern, and then we should vote accordingly. It takes a completely different mindset than most of what's being slung back and forth on social media or even in the news, okay? Don't settle for what the commercials tell you. Don't settle for that social media post as your informant. Do some research. I'll tell you how to do that next time, but in the meantime, I want you to pray about this stuff. This is serious stuff. I want you to pray about it. Be humble. Don't be accusatory. Don't be hateful. Don't be crude. Don't do it. Rise above. Okay? Submit this stuff to the Lord in prayer, because after all, God is sovereign. He is in control, and he might do things differently than you think he would do them. Don't assume you know exactly how God is going to work, but do assume and do bank on the fact that God is in control. He is sovereign. He is working out his plan for America and for the rest of the world, okay? So with that in mind, I'll take a few other steps in the coming videos to help you to determine prayerfully, how should I vote? How should I approach my vote? Okay? Wandering Pastor saying peace. May God's grace go with you today. All right, have a great day.